In 2017, a 22-year-old man named Michael walked into a sprawling, sun-drenched rehabilitation center in Southern California carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a desperate hope for sobriety. His family had drained their savings to afford the 30-day residential program, believing the facility's polished marketing materials that promised individualized, world-class care. Instead, Michael was placed in a crowded, understaffed facility where group therapy was led by uncredentialed technicians, and a single psychiatrist managed over 100 patients. He relapsed within 48 hours of discharge, a tragic outcome that was not an anomaly, but a calculated byproduct of a rapidly shifting industry. For decades, addiction treatment centers operated primarily as small, independent or non-profit sanctuaries deeply embedded in their local communities. Care was often driven by clinical professionals who understood the fragile, non-linear reality of overcoming substance use disorders. But as the opioid epidemic accelerated, creating a sudden massive demand for rehabilitation services, Wall Street recognized an untapped market. The delicate nature of addiction recovery was about to collide violently with the relentless profit-seeking mandates of institutional investors. The transformation began quietly, orchestrated by massive investment conglomerates, utilizing a financial instrument known as a leveraged buyout. In a leveraged buyout, a private equity firm acquires a target company using a significant amount of borrowed money, with the acquired company's own assets serving as collateral for the loans. Between 2010 and 2020, private equity firms executed hundreds of these buyouts across the behavioral health sector, injecting over $13.8 billion to target local rehab centers and roll them up into massive national chains. Firms deployed billions to consolidate the fragmented market, focusing intensely on a metric called EBITDA, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. To maximize this metric and service the massive debt loads placed on the newly acquired rehab centers, the corporate playbook demanded immediate, aggressive cost-cutting. The financial engineering required rapid, exponential growth, transforming facilities designed for healing into high-volume processing plants. The immediate consequences of these boardroom calculations materialized on the clinical floor as severe reductions in staff-to-patient ratios. Experienced, highly credentialed addiction specialists were quietly replaced by cheaper, entry-level behavioral technicians. Nurses reported being stretched across multiple wards, unable to properly monitor patients undergoing dangerous withdrawal protocols. The focus shifted entirely from long-term patient recovery outcomes to maximizing daily census numbers, ensuring every bed remained filled at all times. This desperate need to maintain maximum occupancy birthed one of the darkest phenomena in modern healthcare, a practice known as body brokering. Brokers, often operating under the guise of independent recovery advocates or marketing affiliates, were paid lucrative kickbacks to funnel vulnerable addicts into specific private, equity-owned facilities. Patients were essentially commodified, treated as walking insurance policies whose value was dictated solely by the generosity of their out-of-network benefits. The regulatory landscape surrounding these facilities was dangerously porous, allowing predatory insurance billing fraud to flourish unchecked. Facilities began routinely subjecting patients to excessive, medically unnecessary urinalysis testing, a practice that could generate thousands of dollars per patient per week. Urine cups became liquid gold, billed to insurance companies at exorbitant rates while the actual therapeutic care provided to the patient was systematically hollowed out. The human cost of these aggressive billing practices was devastating for individuals trapped in the cycle. Patients were routinely kept in high-intensity, high-cost residential programs until their insurance benefits were completely exhausted, at which point they were abruptly discharged, regardless of their clinical readiness. This manufactured churn created a revolving door of relapse and repeat admissions, a horrific cycle that actively benefited the corporate bottom line while destroying families. Addiction medicine experts watched in horror as evidence-based care models were systematically replaced by generic, one-size-fits-all programming. According to veteran clinicians, the specialized intensive therapy required for dual diagnosis patients was stripped away because it was too expensive to administer and did not yield immediate financial returns. The nuanced, deeply personal journey of rehabilitation was overridden by standardized corporate protocols dictated by executives with no medical training. The consolidation strategy continued unabated, with private equity firms acquiring not just the treatment centers, but the surrounding infrastructure of the recovery industry. They bought up sober living homes, outpatient clinics, and specialized billing companies, creating vertically integrated monopolies that controlled every step of a patient's journey. This closed-loop system ensured that once a patient entered a specific corporate network, every dollar of their treatment could be extracted and funneled upward. To extract even more capital, investors frequently utilized a tactic known as a sale-leaseback agreement. The private equity firm would sell the physical real estate of the rehab center to a third-party investment trust, generating an immediate, massive cash payout for the firm's partners. The treatment center was then forced to lease back its own building at exorbitant commercial rates, adding a crushing new operational expense to an already strained facility. Facility directors suddenly found themselves drowning in overhead costs, forced to prioritize rent payments over patient care. Whistleblower testimonies from former administrators reveal a toxic culture where clinical decisions were routinely overruled by regional financial managers. If a patient's insurance denied a claim, staff were instructed to immediately downgrade their level of care or initiate discharge proceedings, regardless of the patient's physical vulnerability or risk of fatal overdose. State and federal regulators proved woefully unequipped to police this sophisticated corporate shell game. Because addiction treatment centers are often licensed differently than acute care hospitals, they operate in a gray area of healthcare oversight, subject to fewer unannounced inspections and less stringent reporting requirements. This lack of transparency allowed private equity owners to obscure their aggressive cost-cutting behind layers of corporate subsidiaries, shielding the parent companies from direct liability when patients died. The ripple effects of this regulatory blind spot extended far beyond the walls of any single facility, actively exacerbating the national overdose crisis. By degrading the quality of care and prioritizing rapid turnover, these corporate chains were effectively releasing highly vulnerable, newly detoxed individuals back onto the streets with zero ongoing support. The resulting wave of fatal relapses placed an immense burden on local emergency rooms, first responders, and municipal public health systems. For the families left behind, the grief is compounded by the staggering financial devastation wrought by these predatory practices. Parents who mortgage their homes or drain their retirement accounts to save their children are left bankrupt, holding bills for hundreds of thousands of dollars in out-of-network charges that their insurance ultimately refused to cover. They bought into the promise of a cure, only to realize they were funding an intricate wealth extraction machine. Healthcare economists argue that the private equity model is fundamentally incompatible with chronic disease management, particularly in the realm of behavioral health. The core mandate of a private equity fund is to double or triple its investment within a strict 5 to 7 year timeline before selling the asset to another buyer. This short-term horizon intrinsically discourages the long-term investments in staff retention, facility upgrades, and comprehensive aftercare programs that are vital for sustained recovery. When the inevitable market saturation occurred and the lucrative out-of-network billing well began to run dry, the firms executed their exit strategies. They offloaded the heavily indebted, operationally hollowed-out rehab chains to other investors or simply allowed them to collapse into bankruptcy. The original private equity sponsors walked away with hundreds of millions in profits, leaving behind a shattered landscape of closed clinics, unpaid vendors, and displaced patients. The aftermath inside these collapsing facilities was chaotic and deeply traumatic for the remaining medical professionals. Dedicated counselors and nurses arrived at work to find their health insurance canceled, their paychecks bouncing, and the facility locked by creditors. They were forced to abandon patients mid-treatment, scrambling to find safe placements for individuals undergoing severe psychiatric distress, all while the corporate executives who orchestrated the collapse faced zero professional repercussions. This pattern of acquisition, extraction, and abandonment highlights a catastrophic failure in how the United States regulates healthcare ownership. Lawmakers have repeatedly failed to close the loopholes that allow financial institutions to hide behind corporate firewalls, preventing grieving families and defrauded state programs from piercing the corporate veil to hold the true architects of these schemes accountable. The laws remain built for an era of independent doctors, not multinational asset managers. Today, the landscape of addiction treatment remains permanently altered by this era of aggressive financialization. While some states have attempted to crack down on body brokering and excessive urinalysis billing, the broader consolidation of the industry under private equity control continues to dictate the standard of care. The fundamental conflict between delivering compassionate, individualized medical treatment and delivering double-digit returns to institutional investors remains entirely unresolved. We are left to measure the true cost, not in EBITDA or shareholder dividends, but in the empty chairs at family dinner tables across the country. Every time a patient is prematurely discharged to meet a financial quota or denied vital psychiatric care to save on overhead, the system betrays its most fundamental ethical obligation. The vulnerability of addiction was weaponized, transformed into an asset class to be mined until it was empty. When one examines the quiet takeover of addiction treatment centers, it exposes a chilling reality about the modern American healthcare apparatus. When the delicate nature of human recovery is subordinated to the ruthless efficiency of private equity, rehabilitation ceases to be a medical intervention and becomes a purely extractive industry. Until we demand systemic transparency and enforce strict limits on corporate profiteering, the cycle of exploitation will continue, fueled by the most desperate moments of human life.